Hello and welcome to this podcast. This is part of the Fundamentals podcast, which is about how we can make bigger and bolder differences to the lives of the people living in the Liverpool city region. The programme and the podcast came about because at Capacity we've been thinking about how we do things differently and more effectively across public services. And, we're realists. We recognise that we're, in a really complex environment trying to do really hard things, but can see that the cultures, the structures that we're working in are often blockers to the changes that we're trying to make. And so part of the work that we're doing is trying to find the people that want to work through those blockers to try and improve how we deliver public services. So that's a little bit about the kind of broader story of the podcast. But we're here today to talk about a particular project called Round Here. It's a participatory design project. And I'm here with Dr Emily Rempel from the Civic Data Cooperative. And we're going to talk to you about what we've done in the project, the kind of approach that we've taken, the lessons we've learned along the way, and hopefully we'll have a bit of a laugh at the same time. So my name's Emma Lord. I'm a director at Capacity. We work in and across the Liverpool city region, helping to make public services people services. So Em, do you want to introduce yourself, who you are, why you're here, what your role in relation to the Round Here project has been?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. I am Dr. Emily Rempel, Public Participation Manager at the Civic Data Cooperative. So we are a partner organization with Capacity on the Round Here project. At the Civic Data Cooperative, though, we are funded by the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority and hosted at the University of Liverpool to make data about the people who live in the LCR work for them. So that covers a massive range of projects that look at decision-making around data, how to put data into action, how to do better research with better kinds and forms of data. But my area, and therefore the most important part of our work at the Civic Data Cooperative, is around how to include residents and community better in the decisions we make around what data exists, how we measure it, and also how data is used. So that is the ethos around the Round Here project. So I'm a co-lead of the project and the academic investigator, and you are the other co-lead.
That's right. And I guess that, the role of people is the kind of the middle of the Venn diagram between Capacity and the Civic Data Cooperative. We've been working with public services and helping them think differently and I guess trying to influence the role of how people and their insights can shape the design and ultimately create better outcomes for people. And we got to know the Civic Data Cooperative and, we don't know much about data, but we recognise that it's got a massive role to play in part of this redesign. And so I guess it's been that mashup of recognising, okay, what's the role of data? Yet we agree people are part of the solution here. But bringing those two worlds together, I guess, is partly where Round Here was born.
Absolutely. And a big ethos for us is that data on its own is meaningless. Just knowing something does nothing unless you can put it into action. So Round Here was sort of our test case into trying to change that narrative of using data simply for research rather than for impact.
Yeah. And so, for those of you who are listening, who are, working in the public services realm and very familiar with tight deadlines for bids, that's how Em and I came together. There was an opportunity to bid for some money. The broad approach was stuff that we were alive to and wanted to do more work in. And so, we spent a couple of days together thinking, what could we do together? What could the Civic Data Cooperative bring? What could Capacity bring? And what might a project look like? So Em, I just wonder if you could kind of cast your mind back and think about, when we were squirreling away, thinking about what this project is, cooking up the ideas, cooking up the approach, what were we trying to achieve?
So looking back to the halcyon days of 1.5 years ago, we wanted to design a community-led data project. That was our big purpose. The details are where we started fleshing out what that meant. So one thing we knew we wanted to do was really highlight the voices of a specific community around data. We wanted to hear what they had to say. The second thing we really wanted to do was have an eye on data and measurement and the technology we could build with or about a community. But the third thing that we spent quite a bit of time figuring out is the so what. So we're talking about data and community and doing something participatory, but how do we frame that to make it accessible to community, to policymakers? And what we landed on was well-being. So when you say the word well-being, there's probably going to be something that pops into your head that feels relevant to you and your community. So we said, instead of just talking to community about their data, how do we design a data system that measures well-being better? What does better mean? How do we bring communities along with us on that journey to both decide what better means and what well-being means, and help and support them to figure that out for themselves?
Okay, so well-being, what does that mean? And in this case, we chose the area of Widnes to deliver the programming. So, we really want to get under the skin of what well-being means in Widnes. To your point, there's buckets and buckets of research out there that defines what well-being means, but kind of the acceptance that definition is usually designed by people who aren't your average resident, in this example in Widnes. So we really wanted to get under the skin of what does well-being mean and what keeps you well. So kind of objective number 1, what does well-being mean? Objective number 2, how can data play a role in that? And I just wonder if you want to kind of introduce the concept of a data commons at this stage. So whilst this project, wasn't massively focused on the data commons, the bigger kind of dream at the Civic Data Cooperative is to build this concept, and we wanted to use this program as a way to generate a conversation around that.
So data commons, it kind of makes you think of like a Roman amphitheater in my mind, but what it is like an online or digital resource that's a single site for all of the data and information about a community. So a data commons often holds open data, so that's data that's already anonymized, accessible for people to use, that already exists on the internet in some form, but it puts it in one location and links it together to make it usable for better insights about a community. So there's a lot of different places around the UK that are doing this or have already developed something similar. The London Data Store is a really good example of that. But what we want to do different is have something that is co-designed with community. So creating a data commons that, again, has this eye on data to impact a single site of information, but is relevant to the people who would be using it. And a lot of the conversations we have is when you think of like a one-stop shop in a community, right? What does that offer to the community? Information about service provision, et cetera. How can we do that with data? How can we have a one-stop shop for data?
Okay, so we knew we wanted to understand what well-being meant for people in Widnes. We know that there's a concept of a data commons, and we're hopeful and curious that can be helpful, but we're not sure what that needs to look and feel like. So this project has helped us explore what that might be. And then I guess thirdly, and the thing that we've been most excited about is the participatory element of it. So knowing that, yes, our jobs are working in public service design, and that, we think we're pretty good at our jobs, but we're not residents. And a big part of what we're trying to push is to creating the space for residents to have more power in decision making. And that has been the third strand of this project. So from your perspective, could you describe that element, that objective?
So participatory design, and I'm going to say that word differently every time I say it, is about prioritizing and co-designing with a community a service or a thing, right? So rather than saying to community, hey, we've designed this really awesome new well-being initiative, here it is, go use it. Yeah. We say to community, first at the start, what kind of thing would be useful? How do we make it work for you? So we take them on the journey with us in designing it rather than just presenting a finished product that may or may not work for them. So participatory design is about putting the community voice into how we develop new services, and from a university and academic perspective, how we do research.
Great. And so, for people listening, they may or may not have heard of the phrase participatory design. I guess it's important to say that there's lots of different ways to describe the principles of participatory design. So some people might call it co-design, some people might call it consultation. There's lots of different languages that you use to describe it, but ultimately it's about people-powered thinking, and creating the space to genuinely listen to what people think and say about anything. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the broad things that we're trying to achieve and explore, but we wanted to spend a bit of time on the podcast today to really talk through the different stages. What did we actually do? We want to be really generous with our thinking and our learning. We want other people to have a go at this type of work. And so Em and I are gonna hopefully talk us through kind of the 6 broad stages that we went through. So practically, what we did, what we heard, what we learned, and just to say, supporting this podcast, we've got a written report and we've got a toolkit. So hopefully you will take some of those tools and test them out in the pieces of work that you're delivering. So as we started this podcast, we started talking about how this came about, and it was a bid opportunity, and like a lot of bids, they force you to think quick. And whilst we were unsuccessful with that bid,
don't tell people that,
we did manage to find some resource to deliver it through another way. So that's great. But that meant that we'd already done a level of planning and thinking. And so once we got the cash to be able to deliver it, we already had the broad ambition. But, that being said, we still spent, 2 or 3 months really thinking about, okay, we've probably got a 9 to 12 month window. What we're going to do? How long do we think things are going to take? What can we take a best guess at? What do we not know? So I guess, just don't underestimate that planning process and thinking about whose role is what, how much a thing's going to cost. So I don't know, Em, what would your top tips be in that kind of planning and design stage?
Yeah, I think because of the original bid process really forced us into finding our stakeholders fast.
Yeah.
Right? That's not necessarily a problem, but it definitely led to us later on having to establish those communication windows and expectations. So I would say having those set from the start. How often are we meeting with the wider stakeholder teams?
Yeah.
What does that look like? What are the expectations for their involvement? I think is really important. And we were incredibly lucky to get a bunch of people who came on board really fast.
Yeah.
Both from the university, so Professor Simeon Yates, Dr. Gianfranco Polizzi, as well as Civic Data Cooperative team members, but then also people actually in Widnes and around the area. And those lines of communication, I think because we went so fast, we had to constantly be going, okay, this is not quite right. Let's do it in a different way. And I think we prioritize at the start getting buy-in from community, not just saying like, oh, like what we're doing, love us, but saying genuinely, how do we make this led by you? I know we're proposing it, so that already puts us in a different power relationship, but how do we make this a project with you? And so I would say establishing those principles and ways of working at the start is a good way to show them that you're not just there to run away the minute it's done.
Yeah. And we knew that we would be working across the Liverpool city region, but there's lots of places in that. And actually, when we kind of cooked up the initial idea, we wanted to do this at a street level.
Yep.
So we really wanted to take, probably, 40 households and work at that level. I guess as we started to think about practically how that might work, we realised that it just wasn't as feasible, and we possibly needed greater scale. So kind of opened it up to more of a neighbourhood level. And so, we did what everybody does. We looked at kind of the desktop research and to try and shortlist a number of areas. We chose Widnes because it's often the poor relation across the city region, and not as many activities like this happen there. So that, I think, was our kind of primary decision maker. But once we got to Widnes, there's obviously then lots of different communities. And so, practically, what did we do? We spent time driving around the area, getting a sense of what they looked like, what they felt like geographically, with their huge dual carriageways, right through, what is on a page, a neighbourhood ward, but in reality was 2 split split communities. So I don't know if you want to just kind of reflect on that time and us kind of comparing the different communities in Widnes and what got us to the decision around the area we did the project in.
Yeah. So we spent a lot of time looking at other projects that were happening in the area. In particular, we didn't want to go somewhere that already had, to say, a glut of projects. Often the communities that rank really poorly on deprivation. Oh, why can't I say deprivation? Deprivation.
You just did.
Ranked very poorly on deprivation statistics. They're places that are conversely then very attractive for researchers and community project organizers to come in and say, like, I'm going to fix everything. You know, that very superhero or white knighting dynamic, right? And we didn't want to be those people. So we didn't want to go to a community that had already been essentially exhausted from consultation. We wanted to find somewhere that had things going on, for lack of a better term, but still could really benefit from us putting some cash into a project in that area. We spent a lot of time, as you said, driving around. Also a lot of time just talking to people who lived and worked in Widnes and Runcorn and saying, like, what part of this community do you think you would value this kind of project?
I'd be interested.
We could talk a little bit about, as you mentioned, the level. So as you said, we wanted to start small. So we went to one very small community in the Widnes area, and the members of the capacity team literally, I'm just going to adjust this a bit because I need to sit up. Members of the capacity team, they spent a lot of time putting posters up, having those really difficult one-to-one conversations with local business owners, people who ran community groups, people who ran cafes, people who were just out and about in the parks using those civic spaces to see if they would like to take part, if this was something. And it wasn't even come on and do this project. It was literally what do you think about this? What do you think we should know? Who should we talk to? And those conversations, from what they told me and from the time I spent with them in community, were really, really challenging, because when you're working at that very small scale, it feels very close and personal to you. So when we say, what does this area mean to you? And it's your neighbor. That's a different conversation than what does this community mean to you and everyone in the place. So we ended up coming to some barriers where people are going, this feels too risky to take part. Because we're having conversations about people I socialize with on a day-to-day basis instead of about an area. And so we had to rethink, what does that mean for this project? We don't really want to have a project where we talk about how much you like your friends and where you're going and why you're angry at your neighbor three doors down. That's not the kind of project we wanted to run. We wanted to run something that was much more about how wellness felt for an entire area.
Sure.
So we had to rescale, right?
Yeah. So we started off thinking we'll do this at street level. We quickly realised that there was too much closeness to be able to have an objective conversation about well-being. So we thought, okay, neighbourhood level. And we, to Em's point, we had hundreds of conversations across a neighbourhood, door knocking, spending time with community groups, spending time in workplaces. And we probably did that for 2 months, possibly a bit longer. And I think the overriding feeling was apprehension. I'm curious but apprehensive to take part in this. And so as a project team, that was not on our Gantt chart. We had not predicted that as a risk, and had to have really frank conversations around, look, we've got things we want to explore. We could stay committed to this neighbourhood, but it's going to take us 12, 18 months to really build trust with these people and convince them that this is something interesting and useful. Or we can expand beyond one neighbourhood and explore it as a town. So Widnes as in this example. And so that's what we did, right? And I guess, between the decision around which place was also us thinking about what are our messages here. So we've got 3 things that we're really interested in, but what is it that we're trying to achieve in Widnes? And we knew that our primary enabler to that was recruiting community researchers. So from a capacity point of view, one of our biggest performance indicators was recruiting a team of community researchers. And crucial to that was how we talked about it and what the recruitment campaign said. So, round here with the dropped H was the start of us thinking about what the comms and branding was. We really focused it on what makes Widnes well. We led with the wellbeing messaging. The data conversation was hidden, I guess, from a recruitment point of view. And it's that led us to the success of recruiting, 14 community researchers. We talked about how we approached it from a neighbourhood point of view first. We were there 2-3 months, recruited probably 4 lukewarm community researchers. And, we were pounding the streets to get those. As soon as we scaled it up to Widnes, it was much lighter touch. It was less relational, although still, super important for us to be there as humans and not just this kind of marketing campaign. But we, that quickly started gathering interest and snowball, and we were soon kind of heading to kind of 20 people that were interested over a period of probably 3 or 4 weeks. Mm-hmm. So from your point of view, Em, as kind of, the head of the project and kind of seeing that transition between neighbourhood and town, what were your observations in the kind of the differences that you saw?
Yeah, I spent like one day in the original community when we were doing the active recruitment. Before that, we'd obviously spent many weeks just sort of walking around and seeing what it was like. But it was tense feeling in a way that I was probably projecting a little bit. But it felt like we weren't welcome, right?
Yeah.
And I, when we went to that larger scale, every event we went to it just felt comfortable.
Yeah.
I think there's something very important to reflect on. I hear a lot from other people who work in public participation and co-design spaces that, people are really hard to find. Mm-hmm. And they say, it's really difficult to recruit people, like especially after COVID, you can't just ask people to take part in something anymore. You have to really, really, really incentivize them. And I think I completely disagree.
Yeah.
People aren't hard to find. Projects are not designed with people in mind.
Yeah.
And so our first recruitment strategy, we were naive in what that community needed to take part and what we were doing. We didn't design it right. Versus when we went at that larger scale, we rethought where we were going, who we were talking to, how often we were talking to them, and that approach. And that dramatically changed both our comfort, which makes a huge difference, but then the success of recruitment. We spent one day at a rugby stadium, for example. Amazing, right? Just literally walking up and down the stands, no expectations, just chatting to people, which normally can feel a bit uncomfortable. And of course it does, social anxiety. But people were very open to it because we caught them in a relaxed moment and there was not a forced to be like, come talk to us. This is about who you're sitting next to, right? Yeah. It was much more about the wider area, and people were very willing to have that conversation.
Yeah. People were interested in, you want a conversation about Widnes? Yeah, I'm interested in that. I can talk to you about that.
Exactly.
What is the opportunity? And so, we had conversations like that in shopping centres, in community centres, on the street, and a lot through social media.
Yeah.
A lot of inquiries came through social media, more so than we were anticipating. So we got to the point where we'd recruited a team of community researchers, albeit later than we were expecting. And we knew that the next task was, the dream here is that we've got a group of community researchers who are going out having conversations with their community. They know Widnes, they love Widnes. We're not asking them to, interview thousands of people. This is kind of small scale. We want to get depth. What help might they need to do that? What training, guidance, tools do they need? And so that was then our next task, wasn't it? We've got a sense of who these people are, and who are these people? They're curious, they're committed, they're really bothered. Mm-hmm. They're really bothered about Widnes and the kind of the pride in the place. And they can also see the potential benefit that having this kind of conversation can have for its residents. So we knew that, and we also knew that this was a piece of research, so there needed to be a level of skill to be able to competently do the work. So how did we approach designing that training? How did we decide on what the content was, how we would deliver it, what some of the tools would be? Could you talk us through about how we approached that?
So we had some excellent tools to base our training on. So we worked with our partners at the Heseltine Institute with Sue Jarvis, who's co-director. And she had just finished a project in Clubmore around training people to take part in community research. So we were like, oh, wow, that's exactly what we're trying to do. This is perfect. So we took that Clubmore training and then we did exactly what you said. We broke down what works for the project that we're running, what more is needed, what can we take out of this that is less relevant. And we broke it down to a series of training sessions, first on like introducing the project and understanding data, what does well-being mean, so that our community researchers were already thinking about these issues and prepared to have those conversations. Then what is research? What are your assumptions about research? We weren't expecting in a couple of weeks to get people through, a PhD on social sciences methods. What we needed them to understand is the basics of how to ask questions, how to listen to people, and how to do conversational social sciences research. So we went over like a bespoke number of like 8 different research methods that we could use in the project around well-being, and we worked with them to decide that method. But the training design itself, we had a lot of excellent resources. There's a lot of research around how to do social sciences training at that community level. So we drew from those plus our own practical experience in facilitating similar things in different sessions to design a toolkit that was just about well-being and data for Widnes.
Yeah. So it was a blend of, teaching, of theory, of practice, testing out, okay, guys, you're part of this team. In a couple of weeks, that means that you're going to be having conversations with people. So can you listen actively? Can you listen without bias or as little bias as possible?
Yeah. Through
to like practically, how are you going to record these? Is that best done on a dictaphone? Is it best done on a laptop? Can you use a tablet? So, from the theory right through to the nuts and bolts was what the training was. And it was delivered by a range of the team, right? So some coming from a more theoretical approach, some coming from a more practical approach. But I guess what was important for us is that it was a leveler, that people felt comfortable with the content, and you could see people's kind of confidence and energy ebb and flow as the different training sessions went on. But from the feedback that we've had, people found it fun, they found it energizing, they found it a way to connect and with both the project team and other community researchers. And look, we ran the training in a pub. Yep. We made sure that every training session also came with a full English. I don't think I can look at bacon and eggs again.
I couldn't eat English breakfast for about 2 months after that finished.
So it was important for us not just to get the skills development, but to set the culture of the project, and for us all to connect as people bothered about this piece of work. As part of the training, we designed the method, we designed the tool, and then we tipped into some of the practical, okay, what is this going to look like for you? So I don't know if you just want to kind of introduce the research side of this and talk a little bit about what that has been running alongside the core delivery of the project.
So we were testing a new model of doing this kind of participatory research for the topics of well-being and data. So all of these like disparate elements have been done a lot, right? People do a lot of research on well-being, they do a lot of research on data and understanding of data, and they do a lot of research on participatory methods in community building. What we were doing was trying to bring that all together in a new and novel way to do this kind of community building project on these topics. So we wanted to ask essentially, have we done this well? What are the experiences of community researchers, both like taking part in the training and doing research themselves? Where were the points of tension? What went really well? How could we talk about that in an academic way? And as I said, there's a lot of academic research about these individual areas, but we wanted to try and create something new that brought it all together. So we did a series of semi-structured interview with the researchers before they took part in the training, after the training, and after they completed their research to broaden out our understanding. So we weren't just reflecting ourselves on what we remembered. We were really bringing their voice into how they experienced the project.
And so part of that was designing how we would go and do that engagement, which was probably the most contentious part of the training. So I don't know if you want to kind of talk us through how we got to the decision and what you observed.
So I am a really big fan of this thing called dotmocracy. And it's exactly what it sounds. It's democracy with dot stickers. You put up a bunch of options and you vote. So Franco and I on the project, the co-research lead on it, we designed a series of cards about research methods. So I think there's 8 to 10 different research methods we presented people with, and we said, our aim in this project is to understand what well-being means to Widnes. Here are different research methods we could use. So we did 2 training sessions on those methods, so they were very reinforced. And then we put them all up on a giant board, gave people like 5 stickers each and said, you can put all 5 stickers on one. You can put 1 sticker on each. Let's essentially do a quick vote. What that came down to is people overwhelmingly wanted to do semi-structured interviews, and a little less, but still significant, wanted to do surveys. So Franco and I decided, let's do another round of voting where it's just interviews or surveys and interviews. And that came down to the very tight margin of a 5-4 vote in which semi-structured interviews won out. Something that has been very interesting to me to see happen is that a lot of the community researchers came back to us and said, we thought we were just coming to help you on a project you were doing.
Yeah.
But this voting process, this co-design where you're training us so that we could make an informed decision about how to do it, made us feel like we were doing the project, which is exactly what we wanted to see happen.
Yeah.
So although it was a little contentious in terms of that nail-biting finale to the vote, it was very effective at building a sense of teamwork.
Absolutely.
And shifting that decision-making. We said to people, like, we will abide by the vote. We're not going to suddenly revoke this and say, no, you've chosen the incorrect method.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're guiding them along on that decision-making. We're not expecting them to independently decide it, which was the point of the training. But we wanted them to feel that they made the decision, and they did.
Yeah.
Would we have abided by, a quantitative survey? We would have.
Yeah.
We absolutely would have done that. Would it have changed the look and feel of the project? Yeah, but that's kind of the point, right?
Yeah.
Of participatory research and design.
Yeah. I remember that point in the training when people kind of said, oh, so you don't know how you're going to do this? And kind of like the panic really in their faces that quickly kind of got them to the second thought, which was, do these guys know what they're doing? And so we then had to kind of reassure them that this is intentional design in the project, guys. Yeah. Like, we broadly know what we're doing, but how we're going to get there is something we want to co-design with you. And it felt like it was a bit of a light bulb moment of them kind of saying, oh, like, you're serious about this. Like, you've not just come to us in a working alongside. We're in this together. So we got to the point in the project, we decided surveys. That's what we're going to do.
Semi-structured interviews.
Sorry. I didn't place any dots down. Semi-structured interviews. And then it was like, okay, what questions do we want to ask? And so it was talking through kind of, look, these are the broad themes that we're interested in, well-being and the role of data. And we've got this idea of a data commons. So what are some of the questions that we want to explore with people? And so we then had to get really quickly to, okay, so what are you going to do? And so we worked with each person individually to get their personalised research plan, for want of a better phrase, which was them thinking, okay, practically, who am I going to speak to? How am I going to recruit them? What are my concerns? What are my hopes? How am I going to stay safe? And so we kind of, we had to make sure that we were straddling both the ethos and the broad approach to the project, as well as the practical nuts and bolts of the safety side of things.
We anticipated, I think, a lot of questions and problems around the health and safety side of things. I think coming from institutions, and organizations, that's often the way we think about projects. So we came prepared with a whole half day of training on how to stay safe, who to contact in an emergency, who to contact when it's not quite an emergency, but something has happened, you know, like a community researcher going to do an interview and the person being really distraught or something.
Yeah.
So we spent a lot of time prepping materials, doing that, and then giving them enough paper to like think about the size of Titanic, about the health and safety aspects of things.
Yeah.
But in the end, that was not what people were worried about.
No.
What they wanted and were worried about is, how are we going to ensure this is an accurate process?
Yeah.
How do we get the right people to do these interviews?
Yeah.
How do I do the interviews in a comfortable way? Who should I talk to? So that definitely surprised me, because I anticipated a lot more of concern.
Yeah.
But it was really much more about the impact of the project and how it was going to work.
Absolutely, yeah. They were bothered about the so what of the project. We spent a lot of time, particularly because we were asking community researchers to ask people about conversations about well-being.
Yeah.
You know, lots of stuff could come up in that, and we were conscious that these guys are going out there doing it independently, quite isolated. We needed to make sure that, you know, there were lots of safety nets in place. And it's difficult to say, right? If we hadn't have done that, would there have been more challenges in that space? Or is it because we maybe over-egged it that felt pretty smooth? But I guess, you know, we've got to the training, we designed what we were going to do, people had a plan. There was then a bit of a period of time as we were going through ethics process before we could go live with the community research. And so, you know, certainly from a capacity team point of view, we were really intentional about staying connected to those community researchers. They've just gone through a pretty intense period of training. They're excited. We needed to keep that energy high. And so we did, you know, for probably a month or two, just regular touch points with them, checking in, people are okay, getting their kit organised. You know, we had lovely shiny lanyards, we had jackets if people wanted branded jackets. Nobody did for future budget planning.
I have heard that is because it looks like a Morrison store jacket, and that was our mistake. I brought it into the office and they're like, "Are you getting a part-time job?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" They're like, "Why do you have a Morrison store jacket with you?" I'm like, "It's for the project."
But people love the lanyards.
People at Morrison's clearly don't have lanyards on. That was our win.
Okay, so nobody wore the Morrison's jackets, and we got straight into the community
research.
Money. You know, so it was then summertime, which, you know, was by accident rather than design, a brilliant time in the year to be having conversations. People are a little bit more relaxed. People got a little bit more time. And so we had a team of 17 community researchers who completed the training. And they then went out and had about just over 200 interviews with people, which again was more than we were expecting them to have.
Much more.
So, you know, from our point of view, we were expecting people to have a handful of conversations with people. And so then when we started getting recordings back of, you know, 10, 20, 30, we thought, oh, hang on a minute, how well have we communicated the expectation here? So, I don't know if you want to kind of share your reflections on the period of kind of the live community research and what your observations were.
I think typically in like a social sciences research project that's doing semi-structured interviews, you do a few interviews. I would aim for 15 to 20 to start with, right? Maybe even 10. And then you see how it's going. Are you hearing interesting things? Then you build. So that's the typical way that I would run that kind of research project. So in this case, I had said to people, start with a couple, you know, see how it goes. I didn't want to be prescriptive. That was a massive mistake. I should have been prescriptive, because when you have a big team full of lots of different people with lots of different life experience, some people will think more is always going to be better. I should do as many as I physically can fit into an 18 hours of being awake in a day, which is what some people genuinely did. You know, they barely slept. They just kept interviewing, which is amazing. Like, that commitment is something we had not expected, but obviously puts up challenges then when one person's done 80 and another person's done 2 and they're like, what is happening, right? So I think that clarity of communication is a really good lesson learned for us. Like, all the interviews are valuable. We've used them all to inform our understanding of well-being and Widnes, but going forward, being more prescriptive isn't always a problem. I think my concerns that being prescriptive meant that we were maybe infantilizing, saying, oh, you can only do this. To me, it felt like we were putting limits on people versus maybe limits are okay in some small circumstances.
Yeah, and just from a practical point of view, we made sure that this project budget covered all the costs of community researchers. They were paid for their time, and so where we had, when we're doing the budget, we're expecting people to spend 2 days on this, and actually they're spending 10 days on it. There's a real practical challenge.
Exactly. Yeah, we only have so much. Yeah, we budgeted generously, but we could have communicated, I think, more accurately. Like, this is the maximum number of hours we can pay out.
Yeah.
To be more clear, so everyone's coming in, because it also leads to people feeling like they're getting inconsistent advice on how to do it, and they feel like some people in our research interviews we did with them were saying, I feel like I could do way more interviews, but you put a stop on it because we're over 200 at this point, but I want to do more. And me saying I appreciate you wanting to do more. We'd love it if you could do more, but just we have a budget and we have no more money to pay people to do this.
Yes. Yeah. That part of the program went swimmingly.
So well. Yeah.
The thing that you're building up for, and, when you're doing your risk assessment, it's our job to think of all the things that could possibly go wrong. The use of tech and uploading things was a challenge. It was administratively heavy. But the research itself, people were keen, people were hungry, people were reflective and self-aware and conscious of kind of trying to get a good spread, and all of the things really that you're trying to achieve in good research, the community researchers were bothered about achieving. So that went great. They had conversations across July and August. And so then coming kind of towards the autumn of this year, it was our job to make sense of that insight. So from a research point of view, talk us through what was happening behind the scenes. So the community researchers gone out, they'd had the conversations. What happened next?
So we took all of the recordings they did. So people had lots of different devices they were recording off of, and transcribed those interviews. So our colleague Franco and our colleagues Jenny and Roseanne, they got together while you and I were both on lovely holidays to put together what we call like a coding framework. So we did thematic analysis with this interviews. That means you start from some guiding questions that we wanted to answer. The big one being, how do people talk about well-being? We broke that down a bit into like personal and community well-being. How do they, if they talk about data and how they measure well-being? And then we use that to rough out some topics. So the first couple interviews that were coming back, Franco, Jenny, and Roseanne used to build out a topic guide. That was then refined with our community researchers. So we really, again, wanted to bring them along that process of doing the analysis with us as well to some degree. Practically, you can't have everyone doing it always. There's timescales.
Yeah.
But we took that initial framework and we said, like, what makes sense in what you heard here, what's missing, what needs to be added in. And that process was incredibly valuable because what that rounded out for us was the context. When I'm doing semi-structured interviews with people, like, I know what was happening in the room while I was doing it. The complication of this and doing research is we don't know what was happening in the room or their relationship to each other in the interview. And there's a big difference, of course, in what you say versus what you mean.
Yeah.
And so having those community researchers in with us going, oh, actually, this is more how I would phrase that. Let's adjust it a little. And then essentially we create a robust guide that we then took back to analyze the rest of the interviews with.
Okay. So we had lots of insight.
So many insights.
So we kind of did the initial screen as a project team, took some of our thinking and assumptions, added quite a lot more depth, which comes, to your point, the community researchers have lived and breathed this. They added the colour. And so then that's given us, the kind of key insights that we were looking to get from the project. So let's, just spend a little bit of time thinking about what we heard, and, bringing us back to what was it that we were trying to understand. So we wanted to understand what well-being means in Widnes. We wanted to understand what the role of data might play in that. And we wanted all of that to be rooted in people of Widnes. So we were confident that third one was ticked. The other two, so what does wellbeing mean? We heard lots of things. We heard lots of things that were, synonymous with what you would expect in terms of the kind of definition of well-being, and that being both at personal and community level, work, employment, purpose has a big role to play in that. Your health, your social connections, your work-life balance, being able to get help when you need it. What does good help look like? How do I find out about things that are going to help me? And challenges in that space as well. Transport came up as a massive barrier. The financial constraints around being able to get help. Trust in kind of decision makers, both locally and nationally, was fairly loud. And that led into, insights around who has got agency. Me as an individual, my local government, my national government, and a blend really of kind of, I love Widnes. Widnes is a brilliant place to be. We've got a really strong heritage and real pride of place, but I'm sensing some disempowerment, and unless we've got some things to feel proud of right now, our sense of pride is really going to plummet. Those were some of the things that we heard. What were some of the insights that really jumped out for you?
I think that sense of community connectedness and pride of place is the thing that came out the most while listening to the interviews. If we had done this project in a different place, we're going to find, like you said, some of those similar things. But I found the real value and the excitement because we were concerned about only hearing back the things we would expect to hear, right?
Yeah.
We really heard so much more about how those things, though, set within the context, the history of Widnes. And that is invaluable to understanding how you measure success in a place, right? And well-being in a place. So that idea of nostalgia for a Widnes that people are incredibly proud of, but is not aligning with how life is right now, was strong.
Yeah.
And what you hear when you look at the bigger statistics around well-being and how well things are doing in Widnes, you see all those terrible things, Q1 on the deprivation index. You hear about it being ranked lowly for all sorts of things like cancer diagnoses, for even getting tested for things like a place is not just those numbers, right? And so what we're hearing from people is like, yeah, those are the numbers about us, but we're proud of the area we live in. It's not that we are left behind. It's that you aren't measuring things in a way that help us get involved and see where change can happen.
Yeah.
So my biggest insight was, that pride of place, that nostalgia, but also how that led to people going, and this is what I want to see happen.
Yeah.
So Franco and I spent a lot of time recently talking about the results and how they talk about visions of change. Hardly anyone in any single interview did not mention a vision of change. It wasn't, I hate this, everything's bad. It's, this is what I want to happen because it has happened. I know it can happen. So how do we measure then, put that again into like a data hub, right? How do we track whether people are going towards that vision of change?
Yeah, massive sense of hope and optimism. Like, we have been brilliant. We are okay, but we are going to be brilliant again. And that kind of big vision, but then also tempered with some of the, I call them kind of more nuts and bolts problems, but just things that aren't working. Like, people broadly, when they get help, if they are struggling, once they've got the help is good. However, getting to that help is really hard. And that being, examples of having to call and call and call and call until you can get the help that you need, through to just not knowing where to start. That was really loud, wasn't it?
It was. And when we said to people, like, let's talk about data, well, when the community researchers mentioned data, a lot of people were confused. Why do you want to talk about measurement? Why would I ever want to access information about this? I know what's happening. But what that conversation then translated into was a really strong information-based issue, right? People were saying, I know stuff exists. I don't know how to get it. Or I know how to get it, but I can't. And why can't everything be in one place for me to access that information? Why do I have to go for my GP for this, one-stop shop for this, council website for this? And how do I navigate that? So that system navigation connected to information was a really strong insight. And I think something specific to Widnes really is that then how that connects to that sense of place. And people saying, like, I live in this part of Widnes, but I don't live in the town center. So how does that relate for me in terms of accessing that information? So we heard a lot about those very, as you said, the nitty gritty, like specific details around transportation and service provision.
So we distilled that insight down and then workshopped that, trying to look at it at the lens of the data commons. So we'd heard all the stuff about wellbeing. We'd started a conversation around data through community researchers, and to summarise that, people were curious about data, but a bit unsure about what their role or their opinion was, and so we wanted to get a bit deeper into that. And so we had a couple of workshops with community researchers, with stakeholders, so people who are responsible for delivering services, commissioning services in the wellbeing space, and I guess people who are connected and invested in Widnes, to start to understand what some of the features and benefits of this data commons might be. And I think, at the start of this project, we expected residents to directly benefit from the data commons. I think what we heard is different. They're absolutely part of it, but I don't think they're massively interested in having an immediate benefit from it. That being said, they absolutely want to play an active role in the design of it. They are, to varying degrees, happy to contribute data and information about different things about them. They want to be part of curating what the data is. They're interested in how we present and organise it. They want to be part of the governance. They want to be part of the debate around what good practice looks like, what privacy looks like. They want to be involved in projects like this. Super interested. We've had more interest than we've been able to manage in terms of, the back end of this project. But access to data about them isn't necessarily a priority.
No, it's the if then what. One of the most heartening parts of this project in terms of a participatory design perspective is how much people are like, this is empowering me. This is giving me, not even empowering, because I think people always have the power. It's whether people are stopping them from exercising it, right? So this project was about sort of taking some of those barriers off and saying, and now have a say. And a lot of that translated in my mind to how data commons allows people to have a say. Right? So how do they upload bits of information that you otherwise would not get? How do we take something like Round Ear and make it bigger, essentially? Make it more accessible for a whole range of people. We have 14 fabulous community researchers who have taken part in this project, and we've given them the ability to have a say on an area, but they already had those opinions. This project didn't create those opinions, right? So how do we create mechanisms that a data common serves that purpose, right? Which is something we had not thought about beforehand.
And, that brings us into next steps, right? So, what we've talked about so far is the project from start to finish. And so, what does next look like? So we've got loads of rich insight that we think is really valuable to inform local planning. And so, we've captured that, and we're going to work with local stakeholders to use that, crudely to influence change locally. But the two biggies are, you know, what has this meant for community researchers and what's next for them? And data commons, you know, design and build. So from your point of view, where do you want to take those next two parts of the project?
We absolutely want to do the actual building of a data commons. Something we heard a lot from the participants was the assumption that it wouldn't be digital, that it would be a physical space. So I think working through some of those conversations, right? If we want to create a tool that allows people in like a crude way, upload data. You know, we're really talking about opinions and perspectives, but upload data, right? What does that actually mean? How can people actually do that? Does it have to be a physical and a digital space, just a digital? So we want to build that resource. But beyond that, in terms of creating impact, we want to design projects with it. Very similar to the initial idea around like data on its own is useless, right? A data commons by extension on its own without any connection is useless. So once we build this, now we're measuring what people in Widnes have said makes them well, what makes their community tick, what those visions of change are. How do we support projects with the data commons so that we can keep doing that uploading of information, empowering people, creating options for service delivery that are different than if you didn't have that rich information in one place.
Okay. And so for, you know, we expect, hope, and are planning to do other iterations of this. But for other people who are wanting to take learning from this, you know, what are the things that you think went really well and that we and others need to really pay close attention to? And equally, you know, what were the points in time when you were losing sleep over and perhaps we hadn't given enough consideration for, but that, you know, next time we absolutely need to?
I think doing a participatory research or design project that was actually participatory, it was our biggest strength. And creating that richness of inclusion and team building, I would do that absolutely exactly the same again. Losing sleep. Some of that is that early relationship building. Like some of that's unavoidable, right? We tried really, really hard to develop those connections, but connection doesn't come from just a desire to build it, right? It takes time. We've developed very good relationships now with a lot of different stakeholders in the region, but like we can't just give those to someone else now. You know, you can't just borrow it from someone else. You need to keep those fruitful and genuine. And so some of that is just like do projects in places you have them already. If you don't have them, anticipate a lot of lead-in time. Only other thing I would say losing sleep is the things that were challenging administratively from an ethics perspective, getting the university on board, are things that now that we've done it will be fine. So I'd say a little bit of like self-forgiveness, not for me, I mean for other people doing it. I will always not forgive myself for the mistakes I've made. But other people should forgive themselves and just do it. Give it a go. It sounds very naive, but like plan it out. It's not going to go perfectly. Someone's going to be upset with you at some point because something did not go perfectly. Timescales were always shifting for us. We were constantly reevaluating when it would end, how long it would take, how much money and effort those things were going to take. And that is the reality of doing this kind of flexible work. Unless you're willing to be flexible, right? You can't do something like this. You need that openness.
Be genuine with the flexibility. And at the same time, don't underestimate the admin. You know, there's been a lot of it. There's been a lot of communication that we've needed to do across the project, and that's been central to the success of it. But it's burnt a lot of time, hasn't it? So consider it when you're planning your budget.
We had like 6 months of lead up, right? We could have done a year.
Right? For sure.
And we had a couple months of planning. We could have done 6 months. Like it's depend. I said give it a go, but also like budget. And be realistic about what you can get done in that amount of time.
Okay, so we kind of come into wrapping things up. You know, we set off with 3 really clear objectives. What does wellbeing mean in Widnes? How can we work with people to understand that? And what is the role of data in all of that? Did we achieve it? What did success ever look like?
Yeah, we definitely achieved it. And I think I was talking to our CEO at the Civic Data Cooperative, and I was saying, like, I've reflected back, like, all of these mistakes and all of these, like, stressful moments, because that's when you need support. That's when you're going, this went badly, but we actually did it. Like, I thought back and I was shocked, because we finished over 200 interviews with community researchers. We did 50 semi-structured interviews just with them on their experience. Like, this was a huge amount of work. Like, speaking about, like, capacity colleagues going out to community, like, we did it and it finished. And that is something that often does not happen. These projects get caught up very easily in those initial difficult phases. Like, when we had to switch community, we could have stopped, but we didn't. And some of that is just, again, that flexibility and having the kinds of team members who go, okay, let's pivot, right?
Yeah. And that's hard, right? You know, people were looking at us as leaders in the project to be saying, what do we do now? And sometimes you don't know what to do now, but it's just taking the next immediate step and saying, this is the direction we want to go in. It looks a little bit different to what we'd initially planned, but let's keep giving it a go and staying committed to the principles and the ways of working rather than the what.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else that you'd want to add about the project?
I would just say that these sorts of participatory research projects, they only create value, really, if you are embedded in things that matter to people. You can do participatory research about, the potholes. People will get involved in that. They'll be interested, but you've got to frame it in something. Like, don't do it for everything. Not everything needs to be a participatory research project. Find something that, like, is important to people, which is why we landed on well-being. And, like, I say this a lot about my wider work around data, but it holds true here. It's that I don't care what people think about data. I care that what they think matters. And this is the approach, like you were saying, you have to take with these kind of participatory research projects. It's about mattering more than it is about those specific details about what people are thinking, because a lot of people will go out to do these projects and they'll be like, well, people are saying the wrong thing back to me. And your project is always going to be, you may as well not do it, right?
Yeah. And we think that is fundamental to achieving the change that is needed to improve the outcomes of people in the city region. And it's that core component that we are wanting to trial, test, explore in other projects. And so hopefully, we'll be back here in a year talking about other participatory design projects that are moving towards achieving genuine outcomes. This has been us dipping our toe into the water as a partnership. We've got some brilliant resources. We've got some great lessons, and hopefully we can apply them to other areas. Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for listening. If you want to find out more about either the work of Capacity or the Civic Data Cooperative, please keep an eye out for us online.